All right. Well, hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Heromakers podcast, season 3. And I felt a little bit lost, you guys, because Anne is not here today. She's traveling the world. You guys know that we talked before. She's going to Bangkok. And so now she's there for 2 weeks. And so I'm flying solo, and I feel a little bit, it's kind of like Bert and Ernie or like Beavis and Butthead. See, I'm gonna like disintegrate without Anne here. She would laugh at that joke, and so I'm just gonna pretend like she's laughing. Oh, our guest Nelly's gonna laugh. This is great. But this is what happens when Anne's not here. I start deteriorating into bad sitcoms and stuff.
Can I tell you, I really appreciate your Beavis and Butthead reference. That's a really good one.
Do you really? Oh, great. Why? Why, Nelly? Why?
It just makes me laugh because it's like, I don't know, the 90s or not even the late
Oh,
80s, right?
I
Like early
know.
90s, MTV. I mean, I
Yeah.
love it.
Oh, I
A little
love
bit.
it. Nelly, can I tell you something? This is funny. I was trying to, as I was thinking of like me and Anne together, and I'm like, oh, we're Sonny and Cher, like we're Thelma and Louise. And then I was thinking, oh, I really need to get some 2021 references in there. Because a lot of my reference points are like the 90s. And I'm like, I don't know how long
I
that'll
love the 90s. My real question is who's Beavis and who's Butthead?
That's right. That's the question, right? Oh, I saw something really funny. I can't remember what it was, but it was about who's the boss. And so who really was the boss, right? If you remember that show. But
I
I guess
do.
our
Tony
listeners
Danza.
may not, may not. If you're under like 30, I feel like that's not gonna happen. But anyways, hi guys. Anyways, it's good to be with you all. And so Anne will be back in a future episode, hopefully soon. She won't abandon me forever. But I'm super excited to have our guest on, Nelli Kim, who is coming from us from New York City. Are you right in the heart of Manhattan? Did you say you were, Nelli?
I am. Yep. Yep. I
Right
am.
in the heart of Manhattan, which is, I feel like I haven't gotten out there for like 10 years. I'm way overdue for a trip out there. And you guys, yeah, and you guys all know we love our East Coast people. I feel like we have more East Coast people than anybody else. And maybe it's just all the cool stuff that's going on out there. But Nelli, let me introduce you. Nelli, she's a fashion designer. Nelli is in fashion. And this is so fun for me because my idea of fashion is like going to Kohl's, the clearance rack. So this uncharted territory, but you're doing some like fantastic work inside the fashion world and combining your work with serving the common good, giving to charities, philanthropy. Like you have this great blend. It's like an intersection of taking business and melding it with making our world better, which is fantastic. So we're going to talk about that. You are an entrepreneur. So we're going to talk about some of the companies that you founded, which I know of at least 3. There might be a couple more in there that I need to know about. But primarily you are super interested. We're going to hear your story into one specific, which is called RÄDEN. Is that how you say it, Nelli? RÄDEN?
Yes, it is. It's a made-up word. It stands for Restoration to Eden. So that's a
Yeah,
good way to think of it. REDEN.
RÄDEN, which is shoes. It's really comfortable shoes, which is part of your journey on why you did this. So really excited to hear about that. Okay, Nelli. So how we usually start is we usually ask people to kind of give us some backstory of growing up. And then, so get us to the point where you knew you wanted to go into fashion, and kind of what were the defining points, up until that point.
Sure. Okay. Well, hi, Laurie. It's so great
Hi,
to see
Nelli.
you, and thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm really
Yeah.
excited. I'm a fan of the word hero and hero makers because I do think we all have the opportunity to have our own hero's journey, whatever that looks like in our current corner of the world. So that's super exciting for me. So my story is I grew up in Hawaii as one of 4 children of Korean immigrants. So Hawaii is a beautiful place, and it was a really wonderful childhood and upbringing. Somewhat uneventful because you're in Hawaii, which is feels like a million miles away. So it was lovely, and I really enjoyed growing up there. But I will say what's interesting about Hawaii is it's actually majority Asian, which is unusual in the United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
So I never actually necessarily felt othered because of my Asian Americanness. But what was interesting was being a child of immigrants, which I think a lot of people can relate to feeling maybe like out of place where they grow up. So even though I was born and raised in Hawaii, I never really quite felt like I fit in Hawaii, nor did I feel like I fit in elsewhere. So in Hawaii, grew up there, went to school actually at the same high school that President Obama went to, which was a fun fact.
Nice, nice. Okay.
And then ended up in Philadelphia on the East Coast for college.
Yeah.
And that was a great experience. I really wanted the opposite of Hawaii when I was going to college. A lot of my friends from school were going to school in California or the West Coast, and I wanted the East Coast,
Mm,
snow, brick buildings, tradition,
yeah.
kind of all of that. And that experience was exactly what I got. So I went to college. I was an English major, and going to college for the first time away and seeing snow for the first time, actually, too, if you can believe
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I started to sort of have fun with fashion because I felt like it was a way of expressing myself, and that's the best part of fashion and style is like
Mm,
being able to have self-expression.
yeah.
And I also think that people might have preconceived notions of who you are growing up in Hawaii or being Asian or just whatever things that people think when they see you. And I felt like fashion was a way to really say, no, this is who I am. This is who I am. So that was
Yeah.
sort of my way into it and why I really enjoyed it. I was an English major, so didn't study fashion at all, but just was something I was incredibly passionate about. So after
Mm,
college, moved to New York because I knew I wanted to work in fashion. So immediately started working. I got a company. I mean, I'm sorry, I got a job at a store called Henry Bendel, which unfortunately no longer exists. But it was a really, really special jewel box of a store that kind of had its heydays in the 1970s.
hmm.
But right on Fifth Avenue, across the street from Tiffany's. And it was a really cool time. It was like the late 90s. It was imagine Sex and the City, kind of like that whole era. I think my first week at work, that Friday, there was a book signing party for Sting. So I was
Yeah.
like, what is my life right now? What is
Nice,
happening?
nice.
This is just like, what is this? This is so fun. I didn't
Yeah.
really think too much beyond it besides I want to be in fashion. I was basically an assistant buyer at that store. So helping pick out product or basically supporting the buyer who picked out product for the store.
Hmm.
So that's how I found myself working in fashion.
Hmm.
Just was sort of like following the thing that I found interesting. And when you're like 21, 22, you don't really necessarily know more than that. Some people have it
Hmm.
all together, it seems like at that point, but I was not that person. I was just like, this seems really fun and I love it and I'm passionate about it and let's do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I love what you say about fashion is a way to express ourselves as well. We talked about that, Nelly, in a podcast we recently did, because one of our guests in a previous podcast or a video I was watching of him, he had a shirt on, right? And so a lot of people will use shirts and like to share messages about who they are, what they value, what they believe, right? So it is like in many ways an extension of like what's inside, like we're able to put that on the outside. And that's one thing I do love about nowadays, and maybe it was like this like 20 years ago or something, but I notice it now. Like I notice that there's a lot more ways that people are integrating kind of what they believe into what they put on their bodies, and like it is very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like a new era of consumer activism because I think about it even
Ah,
just from a personal perspective, right? I think about the brands and the companies I buy, even if it's something like dish soap. Like I actually think like, what are they about? And I know I can
yeah.
say for sure 10 years ago I didn't think that way. So there's something that's happening to all of us collectively where we care about the source of our things, the things we wear, the things we use.
Yeah.
And you're right, fashion can absolutely be a way of making a political statement too,
Yeah.
or like a belief statement. Like, Michelle Obama would oftentimes wear American designers on purpose because she wanted to
Yeah.
bring light to American brands and fashion.
Mm-hmm.
There's instances of this all the time, and
Yeah.
that's what I think is powerful. It's like a type of soft power in a way, right? Like you
Yeah.
don't really know exactly why you feel a way about it, but something about it is it's influencing you in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you are a buyer in the store, and
Yes.
then what happened from there? Because we were chatting, and I one of the things you were saying is you kind of went to different places that are more well known, right? So you kind of worked your way up. So tell us about that.
Of course, yeah. So, worked at Henry Bendel for a couple of years and actually lived through 9/11. So that was a really
Wow.
unique and powerful time in New York City. Um, and actually, having gone through the pandemic in the city, I see a lot of parallels there where there was a lot of fear, uncertainty, people worrying about, will New York ever be the same? And having lived through that time during 9/11 kind of gives me that confidence that it will return because people
Mm,
are resilient. And that
yeah,
was what
yeah,
I noticed about post 9/11 was just people in the community banding together to
yeah,
rebuild New York. And that kind of goes for any place that goes through a terrible tragedy like that. So
yeah.
um, went through 9/11, and I will say in my 20s, I lovingly refer to it as my quarter life crisis because I ended up being in New York after 9/11 and kind of asking myself the question, is this what I really want to do? And, when a life changing event like 9/11 happens, you
Mhm,
start to ask yourself, like, is this what it is? Should I try something different? So I
yeah,
actually moved back to Hawaii for 4 years,
mhm,
and kind of just pursued that, kind of scratch that itch. Is there something else I want to do? Do I want to go to law school? Should I pursue a business career or more like respectable professional career? Because I didn't
mm,
necessarily have respect for fashion in that way, in the same way that I kind of do now. But at the time,
yeah,
I kind of thought, oh, is this just a hobby? Like, what is this even?
yeah,
So I moved back to Hawaii. I tried every job I thought I might be interested in. I was like a marketing manager at a yoga studio. I enrolled in business
yeah,
school. I was
yeah,
a paralegal at a law firm. I tried a
mm,
management consulting internship. And at the end of that, I realized the through line was I actually really love fashion. It's the one thing no one has to ask me to do. And I just am continuously excited by and engrossed in it,
yeah,
without anyone asking me to. So I had this mental shift towards the end of my time there where I thought, you know what, I think I just need to do what I love and find a way to get paid for it, and it's going to work itself out.
yeah,
So
yeah,
had that mental shift, and strangely enough, I feel like this is the way God works, is within 6 months I had an offer to go move back to New York City and
mm,
work at Bergdorf Goodman, which was like the pinnacle of luxury fashion retail. So
yeah, yeah,
back to New York in 2006,
yeah,
and I was a buyer in fine apparel. So think Chanel, Valentino,
yeah,
Dior. These are all brands I had never even like walked it. I mean, I saw them in magazines, but I
yeah,
certainly never wore the product.
yeah,
So that was a really, really special experience. And I
mm,
got to travel to Paris and Milan and London and kind of buy
mhm,
beautiful clothing for extremely wealthy people. But
yeah,
I did learn a lot from that experience, which was around service and
yeah,
quality. And like, really, I feel like when you have a great experience, just like a service experience, whether or not it's at a hotel or even at the Apple store, it's because you realize those brands and those retailers and the people, they're trying to make your life easier in some way.
mm, mhm,
And they're trying to make it, and convenience and time is a type of luxury too.
mhm,
So that's what we would notice is like, okay, we're finding beautiful clothing and beautiful product to enhance people's lives. And again, going back to that statement of like showing, kind of revealing what's inside of them to the rest of the world.
yeah,
Um, so I,
okay,
I got to buy ready to wear. I then tried handbags, and then by the end of my time there, I was the vice president of buying for women's footwear. So I oversaw the women's footwear area
yeah,
and bought a lot of beautiful shoes,
yeah,
which was really
yeah.
fun.
Which is fascinating because that then set you up, right, for what you would do in the future, in terms of
Exactly.
your company. Okay, so let's jump ahead a little bit, but still back
Yes.
about 8 years ago, because
Yeah.
this is the first part of your story that I actually read about, Nelly,
Yeah.
which is when you took this trip over to India, and so which changed your life. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I had been living in New York kind of, full force. Once I had found my career, I was like, okay, I'm all in. I
Yeah,
was like hardcore, all about work and really excited to do a great job. I had gotten married in 2012, and then in 2013, unfortunately, our marriage, we were separated and it fell apart, which was really devastating for me because I didn't really understand what had happened and what had gone wrong. So during that time, I kind of leaned into trying to find truth, and that meant for me trying to find wisdom in like any area I could, which for me looked like leaning back into my faith, meditation, like literally I was trying everything. And
mm-hmm.
one of the things I did during that time was actually sign up for a missions trip to India, working with women and children who'd been rescued from sex trafficking. So
Yeah, yeah,
we went on this trip in 2014, and it was in Mumbai. And it was just a life-changing, transformative experience because was meeting incredible people, not just the community we were serving, but also the people who worked for the NGOs on the ground.
Hmm.
And I would look in their eyes and just know, like in the depths of my soul, there's actually nothing different from us besides luck. Like
Mm.
you were born in your family, I was born in mine, and that was a very important thought to have because I thought, you know what? I think I'm being shown this for a reason. I don't know what to do with it yet, but
Mhm.
I think there's something that's going to come out of this. And meeting with the people on the NGO, meeting the NGO workers, it was amazing for me to see modeled a way of being in the world where my beliefs could align with what I did. And I had that thought, like, what if I can use my gifts in service of others? And I was like, but how can that be? I work in fashion. Like, what is that? What kind of service can I be? You know, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a social worker. I didn't really see the obvious through line. But when I came back, I remember talking to my missions trip leader, and she was asking me, like, what do you think you learned from this? And what was your takeaway? And it's like, it came out of my mouth before it was like, oh, I think maybe I'm supposed to start a brand with the express purpose of giving back. And I'm like, wait, who said that? What? That's for somebody else, not
Oh
me.
man. And then once it's out of your mouth, it's like you're almost committed to it, right? Because then you're like the accountability kicks in. Yeah.
What, like, where did that come from, you know?
Yeah.
It's like,
Hmm.
that's for somebody else.
Hmm.
That's for someone who's really qualified and equipped to do that. Like, I
Yeah.
just want to like have my job. So I just sort of thought I'd go back to work, and I wasn't going to think more about it per se. I'm like, okay, yeah. Like that's crazy. So I went back to work, but it was as if something had shifted inside of me, and I
Yeah.
wasn't really the same, and I couldn't exactly get passionate about buying really expensive shoes for really wealthy people as I used to be able to get
Yeah.
excited about
Yeah.
just kind of the beauty and the fun of it.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I think I can't do the same thing and expect different results. So I guess I'm going to be open to what the next step is. And so started kind of interviewing for other places and actually thought about leaving Bergdorf for the first time, which I'd been there for almost 10 years at that point. So never thought I would leave. And I
Mhm.
ended up kind of working at various different companies so I could understand scale and price point and come upon my big idea, whatever that was. I actually had no idea what it was going to be. I just knew that we were going to figure out a business model where we could donate a significant portion of our proceeds to charity and be that consistent revenue stream for these charities that are doing such important work.
Yeah.
So I worked in anthropology. I worked at a shoe company called Clarifies. And in 2016, I like really thought of my idea. I was like, okay, I got it. I got it. I think there's a white space in the market for truly comfortable shoes, like shoes that look chic and elegant and are for everyday use. They're not sneakers
Yeah.
because the sneaker world is doing that really well. But I just think it's an underserved kind of population of consumers that really just want to look great, but they don't want to wear a sneaker and they need to be professional. Maybe they're client facing, maybe they work in real
Mhm.
estate or they work in a restaurant or a hotel or a
Mhm.
teacher. And you can't just wear sneakers because you feel like it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So I thought that would be really cool to work with an orthopedic surgeon and reimagine what comfortable shoes could be and look like.
Yeah.
I didn't really feel like anyone was just doing that.
Yeah.
So I wrote the business plan for this idea in August of 2016, and then a week later, I was diagnosed with cancer,
Mm.
and it ended up being stage 3C for ovarian cancer. And I asked my oncologist, "What are the chances of long-term survival?" And she's like, "Well, 30%."
Mm.
And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Nelly, did you have any like symptoms or precursors to that, or how did they find that?
That's a great question. The truth is that there's no history in my family,
Mhm.
and ovarian cancer specifically has very, very vague symptoms. So it's actually not unusual for people to be diagnosed at an advanced stage. So
Yeah.
it's like lower back pain. You have
Okay.
to pee a lot, maybe a little bit of bloating. I mean, the last
Yeah.
time I checked, that's called being a woman.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's why a lot of women don't catch it till later. So it
Yeah.
was kind of shocking because I thought, wait, I thought I figured out the plan for my life. Like, why am I all of a sudden on pause?
Yeah.
And so those things happen in your life, and I just had to kind of put my head down and go through the treatment and listen to what the medical professionals told me to do. It was 7 months of surgeries and treatment.
Yeah.
And then, in total, I would say probably 18 months of all of that plus the recovery that happens
Yeah.
after you go through chemo and something like that. But
Yeah.
was very lucky. I had an incredible kind of community come up and surround me, my family, my friends,
Mhm.
my crew from church, the crew from mission trip to India. We
Yeah.
actually started a nonprofit while I was going through chemo
Mm.
to basically continue to support the women and children we met while we were
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting because you never think like, is there a reason why I got, I never thought like, oh, I'm going to find a reason why I got cancer. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think I was supposed to get it, but I also think sometimes there's things that happen to you that you don't have control over all the time, but we get the choice to decide to respond to it in the
Yeah.
way we want. Um, but while I was going through chemo, I started to develop neuropathy, which is basically sensitivity, tingling, numbness in your extremities, in your feet
Mhm.
and your fingers. And for me, that manifested as pain and sensitivity in my feet. So I actually couldn't wear really most of my shoes.
Mm.
Definitely couldn't wear a high heel. No way. It was
Yeah.
like living in Uggs and Birkenstocks and
Yeah. Yeah.
sneakers. And I was like, whoa, that
Mm.
idea I had thought of, like now it's actually super personal to me. Like I
Yeah.
actually really understand this from the
Yeah.
side of the target consumer.
Yeah.
So that was super interesting. And
Mm.
that's sort of how it all came to be. Like it's insane how those things happen, right? And
Yeah.
I think there's this like incredible Viktor Frankl quote,
Yeah.
um, who, he's just someone I think is so incredible, but it's between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Mm.
And I think that's just a really beautiful quote because
Mm.
even in the time we're in now, where it feels like so much is out of our control, what choices do we have? What agency do we have
Yeah.
to feel about, how to process things or how to make things better?
Yeah. Um, okay. Can I go back a second too? Because that quote is actually like the stimulus response. It's really interesting. Um, can we talk a second about personal responsibility? Like you had said that okay, so you're in Mumbai and you realize that the difference between some of these women and you was luck, right? Like, it, and I think a lot of times people like we don't take long enough to actually reflect on what are we responsible because we have been given so much, right? I mean, I think about this with my own life and I'm like, yes, I can complain, but if I'm looking at various parts of the world, various people, I have so much, right? And and what did it look like for you to, I mean, you said you came back, something came out of your mouth like, I think I'm supposed to be doing this, and then you did it, right? But I'm just wondering about how do we all maybe like really press into what are, asking ourselves, what is our responsibility if we have been given much to give
Mm,
to other people? Like what does it look like to cultivate something that results in that? Is it creating margin in our lives to do that? Is it saying it out loud and accountability? Like, as you reflect back on your own experience, what do you think was key to actually taking that realization and then turning it into a reality? Because I think a
mm,
lot of times, Nellie, a lot of us let opportunities pass us by, right?
mm.
Like we're like, oh, I wish I would have done something there. I should have helped there. I should have. How do we embrace um, these opportunities we have because of what we've been given?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also think, well, first I want to say that, there's a real like fine line between feeling like a kind of an empowered responsibility to make a change in the world and also like the guilt trip part, because I think people can feel that too, and
Yeah.
that pressure of like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm not allowed to feel bad about anything because I have so
Yes.
much. But the truth is, there's no hierarchy of suffering. Like people go through things
Yeah.
all the time,
Hmm.
and how you show up in the world is like so much a function of like what you've been given, but also what your past experiences are. So not everyone necessarily can show up in the same way, but it doesn't mean their impact is any less in the world,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I do think, like, first and foremost, I think about my own past, and I think it started with an awakening, kind of like my eyes were opened to something.
Yeah.
I witnessed something.
Yeah.
And then that, I think that can also be the impetus for a lot of people. Like, you witness a problem in the world, or you witness something that doesn't sit right with you, and you think,
Hmm.
oh, that's weird.
Hmm.
And it's affecting you for a reason. So I also think that's something to like listen to. And when we started the nonprofit in India, it wasn't like we had these grand aspirations to solve sex trafficking. Like, that's not something we can do, but we thought maybe we can send like one or two students to higher education, like to nursing school or college, and help support them through scholarships. Like, that's really
Yeah.
that's the very
Yeah.
pure, like, that's all we're going to do.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, that was 2016. We're now in 2022, 6 years later, and that has become like a daycare center. We're now, sending 60 kids to private school. We're sending
Wow.
five five women to nursing school. Like, it's
Wow.
weird how you can just start with one small thing and then it
Yeah.
kind of blossoms
Yeah.
because people come alongside you and they want to help, and then you kind of get the opportunity to invite people along
Yeah.
into what you're doing. So I just always think of like, maybe it's just, where do you start? That's the smallest possible step that could be in the direction that could possibly help. So maybe it's like
Yeah.
your neighbor, you notice your neighbor is really sad. So like, maybe it's like you just bring them food one day, you
Yeah.
know? And there's
Hmm.
a lot of people for whom I'll be like, I am in a very specific situation where I don't have children, so I don't have that necessarily that responsibility. And I think
Hmm.
that's a huge responsibility that a lot of parents carry to pour into the next generation. So I'm in a different role where I don't have my own kids. So that frees up all this other time, and I can kind of serve in a different way. For
Yeah.
some people, it's like just being an incredible friend to the people around them, and they may not
Yeah.
have that person in their life anywhere else, or a safe space where they can share who they really are in the world.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
just always think there's opportunities all around us to be of service, and that to me is someone who's a hero. Is like when you
Yeah.
decide to be of service.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, Nelly, tell us about RÄISEfashion, because you were telling me about this new endeavor that you're doing, and I love it. And that is, I'm going to just preface it by saying that as you're talking, I do want people to think about this concept of hero maker and building other people up and empowering other people up. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so RÄISEfashion is a really, really cool organization that I get to be a part of. So it started from a place of pain, like so many things do sometimes, but it was in response to the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and some internal reflection within the fashion community, kind of asking ourselves, what part do we play in maintaining a broken system?
Mm.
So it started really very, very, very humbly. Literally, like, two friends of mine who I know from the industry were put on social media, like on Instagram stories. Hey, we're offering our services pro bono to any
Mm.
BIPOC brands for free consulting. Anyone need help? Just DM us.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
literally, I saw that, and it was like a light was like, oh, that's something I can do about it. Because I was like everybody else in this country, just feeling really heartbroken and
Yeah,
sad and powerless. Like, what do I do about this? Like, this is such a huge problem. And so I immediately DM'd them and was like, hey, like, me too. I'm going to volunteer, like, use me however you need.
yeah,
And before we knew it, it was like 100 people had DM'd them. We had a list of 100 names within the fashion industry.
yeah,
And again, it wasn't like we were like, oh, let's start a nonprofit. It was like, let's just
yeah.
offer our services to people. So they invited me to join the founding board because of my experience with Embers International, which was our India nonprofit,
Mhm.
and also just we kind of knew each other, and so there we launched RÄISEfashion in August of 2020. And basically, the mission is to advance racial equity in the fashion industry and support the next generation of Black talent in fashion. And the way that we do that is we provide pro bono consulting and advice
Yeah,
and expertise to help break down those barriers to entry. Because fashion is just such a notoriously insular industry.
yeah,
And oftentimes, those industries they operate on like who you know and who did you go to school with and who's a family friend and where did you intern. And by the way, even getting those internships is very difficult to do when you don't know anybody within that industry. So that's sort of where we see ourselves playing a role. We thought long and hard about, do we even need to exist? Is somebody
Yeah.
else already doing this work?
Hmm.
And can we just support them?
Yeah.
But it turns out that our specific niche of the site type of services we're providing
Yeah.
um, doesn't exist, and that's sort of the power of this network that we've created. It's now like over 200 people, fashion professionals, who just are in our network to provide advice and consulting as needed.
Yeah.
So we have dreams for that too, because if you are going to try and help support the next generation of Black talent, what does that look like? It's not just a couple of hours of advice here and there,
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, back to our earlier point, is how it started. It was like, let's just give an hour here or there.
Yeah.
And now we're thinking of like, okay, no, now we need to raise money to give them capital and funding, and not just advice, but they need money and they need connections, and maybe they need in-kind support, like
Yeah.
help creating content and, use of photographers and PR. So everything that it takes to build a business. So I
Yeah.
think that's been really
Yeah.
rewarding, to be a part of that. And, we all have a part to play and can make an impact.
Hmm. Yeah. I really like that. And it's something that I've thought about too, Nelly, is just this idea of making ourselves available. Like for those of us who have been, a decade or two down the line in our careers, sometimes I think we can get wrapped up in what we're doing and we forget where we once were 10
Mm,
years ago, 20 years ago, let alone where other people once were who didn't have the open doors that we had, right? Like, for instance, I just had a conversation with a college student. She reached out to me on LinkedIn and she's
mm.
like, hey, I noticed you're in communications and marketing. Can we just talk? And it was so much fun, Nelly. We chatted for about a half hour, and she's kind of looking like, what do I do? Job openings, and I was able to help her. And I remember, Nelly, like I remember being in that place, right, where you're just getting out. And I think like that's critical, is remembering like that we need to be available to other people who are coming behind us, right? Like serving in the mentorship role instead of getting so in our bubble and so insulated, which is so easy to do. Like, how do we break down the bubble and let other people in as well?
For sure. You know what you're saying. I mean, the power of LinkedIn. I love, love, love that story, Laurie. I think that's amazing. And also, if you have any listeners who are in school, like they should all leverage
They
LinkedIn. It's the
should.
best.
Amen. Yeah.
You can get into almost any door if you say, I'm a student at this place.
Yeah.
Can I talk to you for advice? Like,
Yeah.
very few people will turn that down.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, we forget that some of the things we think are obvious, people don't know at all. Like, even like, okay, write a cover letter. And by the way, this is the type of question you should ask in an interview. And if they ask you a job interview, do you have any questions? Do not say, no, I don't have questions. You better have a
Mhm.
list of questions, because you should have
Yeah.
researched the company beforehand. Like all
Yeah.
these things that seem
Hmm.
really baseline.
Yeah.
Um, and I've definitely seen that happening even with RÄISEfashion, where there's sort of things that I've forgotten, to me seem very like fundamental about, having a business in fashion, because I worked in it for 20 years. But for someone just starting out, they may not know that they can
Yes.
ask the buyer for this kind of payment terms arrangement, or
Yeah.
say that this is this, whatever it might be. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's a really beautiful, beautiful point, Laurie. I
Yeah.
love.
Yeah. Yeah. Availability. And then the other thing I was thinking as you were talking, right, because you were saying, okay, you basically are like, hey, 1 hour, like I'll make myself available for one. And then it turns into like the funding, right? And so it grew into something much bigger. And I want people to hear that if they have a dream, like don't maybe think so far down the dream that it feels impossible, right? Like this is the whole analogy of like, one step at a time and
Yep.
kind of that whole thing, right? And that before you know it, it has grown into something. Like I remember one of our guests, Nelly, where she started something called Beverly's Birthdays. And she basically was working in an inner city context, talking to this child about his birthday. He had never had a birthday party. Like what is a birthday party? He'd never been celebrated. So she's like, oh, I'm going to throw a little birthday party for this kid. And it grew. It started with one birthday party, and then it grew into Beverly's birthdays, where now she provides birthdays. She throws birthdays for kids who would never have, who come from foster care settings, et cetera, who are never celebrated, or birthday boxes, whatever. It started with one thing, right? It started with you saying, I'm gonna give an hour, or so it doesn't have to start out with this massive plan, right? It doesn't. Yeah, one little step.
But
I
by the
love
way,
that.
like massive plans, oftentimes like you can make the most amazing detailed plan in the world, but then you start and it's almost like God laughs, like, oh, good one.
Oh, right.
Like
Yeah.
it's like I mean,
Yeah.
and the world, interferes and there's things
Yeah.
that happen along the way. Like sure, make all your plans, but you also
Yeah.
have to be kind of open and aware of what's happening. Actually, do you know the activist Brian Stevenson?
No, who's
Oh,
that?
he's incredible. He wrote a book called Just Mercy, and he's the founder of the Equal Justice
Yes.
Initiative.
Yes. Now that you say that. Yep.
Yes. So he uses this phrase a lot, which is to be proximate to the issue, right?
Yes.
And why I like that so much is like to your point where you start small. Like the truth is maybe you need to just be around the thing that you think is problematic or that you want to help solve
Yeah.
and just witness it for a while because when you come in with all the ways that you think you're going to solve this problem and you don't have enough information,
Mhm.
you're probably not going to provide the most nuanced solution to what is clearly a complicated problem.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't still exist,
Yeah.
right? So even like with Mumbai and Embers International, we founded that in 2016, but that was after having gone there 2 years in a row. So it had been after 2 years of going and witnessing and kind of staying in touch with
Yeah.
the group on the ground and the
Yeah.
community there to hear how can we be of service, not just like here's all the things
Yeah.
we're going to do to solve all of your
Mhm.
problems because
Mhm.
the truth is we didn't really even understand what their actual problems are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just being proximate is, I think, a
Yeah.
really beautiful first way of showing up.
Yeah.
Like even if we were to use that example again of like, oh, my neighbor's sad, okay, well maybe just like check in on them, bring them
Yeah.
food. Like you're
Yeah.
not trying to solve their problems, you just want to be
Yeah.
there for them.
Yeah. And it's not having like a savior complex, right? We're not
Yes.
going in to do any rescuing or saving. We're coming in because people are valuable, right?
Yes.
And if we can lift them up and offer them something that somebody gave us at one point, I mean, that's just part of being a global family,
Hmm.
which is so fantastic. This is like
These are my favorite types of conversations to
I
have, by the
love
way.
it. I know
Laurie,
I
this is so
love
fun.
it. Um, I want to ask you about the time that you had cancer, those 18 months that you were battling with cancer.
Yeah.
Um, was there during that time, were you holding on to this dream of starting this company? Did it take a back seat? And if it did take a back seat, what lessons did you learn during that time? I am hearing like people, like I'm hearing community. I heard that. But tell us about that time and your dream. Um, and and then what kind of that time taught you about life, about your faith, any direction you want to go.
Yeah, for sure. The reason I say 18 months, because technically it was 7 months of treatment, but what nobody tells you is that for a full year after you finish chemo, you don't feel well.
Mm,
In fact, I actually end up still going into, spiking fevers and ending up in the hospital with infections, even like 6 months after treatment, 9 months even.
yeah, yeah,
So for sure, community was one thing I learned, and REDEN had definitely taken a backseat because I was just like, I mean, if I get to that, great. But right now, I just need to kind of get through treatment. And
yeah,
I feel terrible and I'm sleeping 14 hours a day. And my life is so different,
yeah,
so different. And I
yeah,
can't even imagine even just like going to work every day, let alone starting a company. That sounds insane and
yeah,
impossible.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so, community, I would say the reason why community for me was so powerful was because it was a type of grace where I was in a place to just receive. And in my past, I don't generally like to ask for a lot of help. I'm kind of been conditioned to be independent. And so it was interesting to kind of just let go of all of that and just be like, okay, I'm just here to receive.
Yeah.
And it felt beautiful. I felt very connected to my friends and my family and just kind of the world. And there was just like a weird kind of gratitude up
Yeah.
through all of it. That being said, it wasn't like all butterflies and hearts. Like there were times where I
Mhm.
could barely even speak to anybody, and I just spent weeks on end in my pajamas watching Netflix. So
Yeah.
that happened too.
Yeah.
Um, but along the way, I kept kind of coming back to this thought of like, what is there to learn from this, and what wonder how this will be used.
Yeah.
Because I do think God uses literally everything in our past and in our
Yeah.
experiences for the future. So it's not like I had this answer. I just remember watching this one. Do you know this that show Chef's Table on Netflix?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, it's like literally one of my favorite
Yeah.
shows. They
Mhm.
just profile all these incredible chefs. So they
Yeah.
did one, oh, about Alinea, which is in
Yeah.
Chicago.
Yep.
So you
Hmm.
know this story,
Yep.
I'm sure.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, and he had stage 4 tongue cancer, and
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
lost his ability to
He did.
taste,
Hmm.
and he was too tired to cook. So then it's like, if you can't taste or cook, are you really a chef? And he shared his story, which was so powerful because he realized, actually, I can still be a chef because it's not that I have to taste those things or make them physically for me to create. I can
Yeah.
still create with my mind. So that kind of pushed him to the next level. And I remember watching that episode and thinking, oh, maybe I'm going to, maybe having cancer, like maybe being an entrepreneur was never about like doing all the work and doing all of this. I can still do this, and how
Mm.
I do it will be interesting. And so when I started to have that foot pain and neuropathy, I was like, oh, okay, now I
Mm.
get it. It's a missional calling. Like I have to make these shoes for people just like me
Yeah.
who have no other solutions. And like
Yeah.
I went back to work, I couldn't wear any of my shoes, and I was sick of wearing sneakers every single day.
Yeah.
So I was like, this product needs to exist in this world
Mm.
for that reason. Because
Hmm.
even if I'm just solving problems for a very micro niche community, that's still something like I know
Yes.
doesn't exist
Yeah.
and needs to be
Yeah.
solved. So
Yeah. And it coming out of your own personal experience is very meaningful.
yeah,
And I think, and that's oftentimes, I think that's where we find our greatest motivation, right? It's like, what is near and dear to our hearts? What have we experienced? Like, that's where you find people who are getting into raising money for different cancers or Alzheimer's or whatever, because they've had something close. So they've had somebody close to their life impacted by that, whatever. Um,
1,000%. By the way, to your point, like
yeah,
especially these huge issues like cancer, or when you think of like huge, what seem impossible, improbable things that no one can solve, I think we often have this tendency to just say, "Oh, that's too big. Like that's not for me to
yeah,
handle." But
yeah,
the minute it becomes personalized, like you said, where it's a friend or a close one, or
yeah,
a friend of a friend or a family member, then all of a sudden it becomes super personal, and that's there's such power in storytelling, which is why I think you having this podcast and sharing
yeah,
people's stories, like we always hear ourselves in other people,
we do.
even if their story's so specific and you think
Yeah,
like we're so different, there's
yeah,
always something that connects us.
yeah. And here's what I love too about your story, Nellie, before we wrap up, is that you have found a way to be a hero maker in your setting, right? And I think oftentimes people will think it has to look a certain way, but that's not the case, right? It's finding what does it look like in what you're called to and you're passionate about, and even what does it look like in the big context of if you have setbacks, if you have heartaches and heartbreaks. And I have been overwhelmed, Nellie, by the number of people that I've talked to who have gone through very traumatic things,
Mm.
and years down the road, amazing good has come out of it. During it, you have to leave space for grief and pain and all that. But at some point, like over and over, I have seen the redemptiveness of of pain. And that's part of your story too, right? Where it's like you had nobody. I mean, I wish you never had cancer. I mean, I hate cancer. It's terrible.
Yep.
But it gave you like this extra drive, it sounds like, where it became more personal, and you're like, yes, like it was like, we got to do this. Like, let's go. Which is incredible. And so I want people to hear that as well. Like whether right now you're in a place of, oh, everything is going well, let me dream big, or whether you're in a place where you're sitting on the couch in your pajamas, binging Netflix. Hey, don't binge Netflix, by the way, binge this podcast. But if you're in that place, then it's okay. Right. I mean, just don't forget to dream, because there's part of that in this as well. So Nelli, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to be a hero maker, maybe in an unlikely job setting, right? Because you're in fashion, right? And so what about that person who maybe not is in, like a church context or something like that, where it seems like it's fitting? What would you say to that person?
You're saying someone who is in the church context or not in the church
So
context?
somebody who's not, somebody
Oh, okay, okay.
yeah, who's like in business. Like, well, let's just say,
Yeah.
what does it look like to be a hero maker in a business context or finance or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it can be as simple as donating. It can be simple as volunteering your time. It can also be as simple. I mean, I'm trying to think of someone I know, actually know someone who's an entrepreneur, but also works in finance, and she's decided to take a posture of radical generosity. So she donates like a really, I think, hefty, maybe like 50% of her salary to charity, something insane. Because like, you go into business and oftentimes maybe you make a ton of money, but you don't feel particularly inspired by or called by your work, but you do it because
Yeah.
you're good at it and you get paid a lot of money, and it's all those things, and that's totally fine too. Like not everyone has to do
Yeah.
this thing, right? But I think there's always ways that you can be of service, um, whatever that looks like in your little corner of the world. Like maybe it's how you treat other people,
Yeah.
right? Like maybe you're not the person that believes in the zero sum mentality. Maybe you're about mentoring those alongside of you. And maybe you're not just about, getting all the praise and the bonuses, but you help mentor the next generation of young people.
Yeah.
I think all the time people are watching us way more than they listen to what we're saying. They're watching how we move in the world, and you can be of service even if it's a small thing, because people do remember that. I do. I think so.
I do too. Yeah.
Right? Don't you agree?
Yes, I agree 100%. Yeah. Nelli, this was so great. And I feel like there was some very, very strong takeaways here. I love what you said about making yourself available. I love what you said about, um, just realizing the difference between you and the women that you saw in Mumbai and acting on that. Like, I think that's really powerful. And then just starting small, like finding small ways that we can serve other people and be hero makers to other people. I think it's really powerful. So thank you for being on the podcast, Nelli. This is really fun to talk with you.
Thank you for having me. I think
And
I'm convinced that's our purpose, by the way. It's like when we are living in a way that helps and serves others, like it's like we're connected to our purpose on this earth.
Exactly. Yeah. And I will say that in a couple of days is World Storytelling Day. And
Ooh.
so I just would encourage all of our listeners as well, all of you guys, to go out and listen to other people's stories and begin to find how to tell your story in a way that it could inspire other people. I think, yeah, the power of story is just endless, endless. And so thank you guys for listening to this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Share it with your friends, and we'll see you guys next time.